Good morning, everybody. If we can get going, it's gone past. We're a little bit late starting, but different circumstances today. Could I first of all welcome all members and officers? And I think we do have a member of the public. There we are. So welcome, sir. And do we know if he's in for a particular item?
It's
because
on the first item, Chairman.
Oh, so we can run through that in that order. So welcome members, welcome officers, and welcome to our representation of the public here in the public gallery. Just to remind everybody that when you're speaking, the usual protocol with the microphones, please, and switch it on, switch it off, etc. Could we have a declaration of interest, please? Any declarations of interest? Any of the items? No. And confirmation of minutes, please, for the meeting that was held on the 22nd of January 2025. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you. And are there any substitute members, Catherine?
Not on this occasion, Chairman, no.
Okay, that's good. Well done. I have to commend the committee. It's a good trigger for me to be able to say this, for their attendance at committees. It's excellent attendance. And although substitutes are valuable and they're very much part of the team, you know, it is very much appreciated, the regularity of your attendance. So, well done. We move on to, we don't have any speakers today, and the reason I mention that is everybody will be aware that when we do have speakers, we sometimes defer to a particular item and get those done first, but we don't have any speakers, and therefore I'm sorry we'll be robbing the Vice Chair of this role this morning. I know he's very upset over it, that he can't do the excellent job that he normally does in introducing those.
I'm sorry, my face is a dead giveaway there.
Yes, as it usually is, yes. We now move to formal decision items and planning matters. And we're going to move straight to item 1. And again, as there are no speakers, the officer, John Copestake, is not very well, as you'll have seen his name down against all three items, but he isn't very well. So I have to thank Andrew Stell for... when did you know John wasn't available, by the way, Andrew?
Yeah, it's about 5 o'clock this morning.
Was it? So about 5 o'clock he let you know.
I'm fully prepared.
Yes, I'm sure you are, yes. Well, it was here very early in the morning, so you know, that's usually an indication he's fully prepared.
Is it insomnia he's suffering from?
Anyway, Andrew Stell is our officer dealing with these particular items. So we start with item 1. Andrew will go through completely through his presentation. Well, yes, you go through John Copestake's presentation, and then we will have questions and the debate, and then we'll obviously make a decision in terms of this and this application. So hand over to Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, everybody. And yeah, like the Chairman says, apologies if this is less professional, even less professional than normal. The application, and I've had eye surgery, so I'm now in between short-sighted and long-sighted. So I'll use these for the presentation.
You couldn't write it, could you?
I know.
If you did, you couldn't read it.
Thank you. Right, professional face on. This application relates to a site known as the Garden Place, which is at Cropper Road in Whitehills. There, let me just get the pointer on. So obviously M55 junction, B&Q here, Plymouth St Anne's Way, New Road down to Lytham. So this is part of a wider allocation which generally covers that area for mixed use of employment, a neighbourhood centre, and residential development, which I'll show you in a slightly later slide. We're dealing with the Garden Place, which is the garden centre element that's just in this corner here. So the scheme in front of us, mixed use, so there's 58 affordable dwellings proposed, there's a neighbourhood centre, and then there's a series of the open space, the access, landscaping, pond, all the normal infrastructure that goes with a development of that scale. As part of the scheme, the applicants proposed a legal agreement which deals with providing the affordable housing, contributions towards public transport, improvements to the site and the location, some healthcare contributions, and then contributions to a travel plan, which is an LCC highways request. So, as I said, it relates to the parcel of land just to the west of Cropper Road. It's not the first application we've had on this site. We had a couple of applications a couple of years back where the developer proposed an application for residential development alongside an application for the neighbourhood centre. So there were two separate applications. Those were subject to an appeal, and the council was successful in that appeal, largely because we wanted to see a scheme that was a combined scheme that delivered the requirements of the local plan. So the developer's gone away and come back with this collective application that includes the two elements of the development. So, as the bottom bullet says there, this application includes quite a number of amendments from the appeal scheme. It's also been subject to quite a lot of discussion and negotiation and progress since it was first submitted last summer. So, this is generally a site plan. So, this shows the allocations effectively. So, the hatched areas on the western side of Cropper Road, that's Cropper Road, these are all subject to various planning applications for residential development, some of which have gone through the system, some of which will be coming to you shortly. Those are part of the allocation in the local plan. This scheme is also part of that allocation and includes, the allocation includes a neighbourhood centre, which was a key part of the local plan process in terms of allocating the land in that location, because as well as the employment at Whitehills and the residential that's happened on the other side of Cropper Road, there was a desire to see some sort of focus for that community. So the neighbourhood centre was put forward in the local plan as being a key element of the delivery of the development in that particular location. Just to show you an aerial, the site's not the red square, but it's generally that. So those familiar with that area, this is from St Anne's Way, School Road down to Queensway. You'll know Dahlia's Place and the garden centre and the shed outlets and what have you that's associated with it. Just coming to the late observations elements, there have been a couple of changes to the... I might come back to this slide actually, I've gone through it. So the proposed development sets it out here. So 58 dwellings, mixture of maisonettes, 2-bedroom houses and 3-bedroom houses. The local centre is split into 4 units. So one larger unit which is intended to be of a scale that would attract a retail operator, sort of a convenience store, without necessarily naming the name it will be, but a spa or a something of that type of scale. Natured store, and then 3 smaller stores that will be available for Subway, hairdressers, that type of local facility that would be useful to people who live in that area. Alongside that, there's a play area. There's a attenuation pond to assist with the drainage. And then obviously boundary fences, access points, parking areas, all this sort of thing. So this is the site plan that's been presented. So this is Cropper Road, single access point. Come in, this is the neighbourhood centre element here. So the larger retail unit with the frontage to Cropper Road. Smaller retail stores here. Then we get to the play area. Then there's an area of open space around it. that provides you know, a bit of a community focus element to the neighbourhood centre, and then the pond and the drainage arrangements, and then you've got the housing that comes off to it in this direction. You'll see that there's a connection here, and a connection here that go to the land around it, so they're subject to other applications, other development parcels in the local plan, with these greyed out areas being the latest layouts from those applicants, with the intention being that as we sort of work with them on their layouts, they will meet up with these access points, and then that will give connectivity from those sites to the neighbourhood centre, and then through to Cropper Road and the bus services and the like that will be provided on that route. In terms of the principal developments, it's an allocation. It generally meets the allocation in terms of the density of development, the type of development, the scale of the neighbourhood centre are all generally in accordance with what we saw in the local plan. So we've got a local plan policy that deals with that, policy M1, which deals with the delivery of the allocations of this scale, strategic scale allocations, in a comprehensive way. And then we've got the other main considerations are the ones that we expect from any housing scheme of this scale. So just running through those main areas relatively briefly. As I said, it's a comprehensive approach that we're looking for, so that's why we've got this single application rather than the two. That's why we've got those connections to the neighbouring parcels. It's all part of making sure that the allocation as a whole, sort of the Cropper Road area, is developed in a sustainable way. And that's done. There's been a master plan that's been prepared. That was initially submitted as part of the Wayne Homes development, which is a larger development around this particular site that came to committee last year. Because they've got the overwhelming majority of the residential development, they've led on the master plan, but all the applicants are all sort of associated with it. So this scheme generally accords with the master plan that's been presented. One change is that the local centre is slightly smaller, but whilst it's smaller in area, it is delivering what we would expect to see from a neighbourhood centre in terms of the scale of the retail unit, open space, and a bit of sort of community, a play area and sort of general community facilities that you would find around there, somewhere for people to meet. This is the master plan. Don't propose to go through that in any great detail, but this site's down here, so you can see that it is part of that, and that will be the whole site as it's generally developed in years to come. Next thing to talk about is flood risk. That's been one of the reasons that there's been some delay in the applications coming forward. As part of the flood risk work that the Environment Agency do, they changed the flood zone status of the site sort of on the 11th hour of the local plan being assessed. Wasn't sufficient to deallocate the site back in 2018, but it has meant that there's been some sort of detailed technical assessments that's been required of all the developers. This developer's no different. They've done their work. It's been assessed by the flood authorities and the Environment Agency. And as the bottom bullet says, they raised no objection to the scheme that's been presented. You saw the balancing pond that's within the site. Typical approach, the drainage, surface water drainage stored on site, then released at a controlled rate to the surrounding network. Highways, this was one of the sort of bigger topics for discussion when we had the appeal. LCC have put forward their thoughts in terms of the access point and also the ways to make the site more accessible. So they've come up with a proposal for a bus route to service that site, and there are requests for contributions, proportionate requests for contributions from all the various developers to help buy the bus and fund that route. That is something that this developer's provided confirmation that they're agreeable to. So there will be a legal agreement that covers that point as part of the planning decision that's hopefully made. A further issue that we discussed at great length at the appeal was the parking arrangements. The earlier scheme was felt to be deficient in the level of parking it provided. Since then, we've now adopted a parking SBD, and this scheme that we've got in front of us today satisfies the requirements for that. So from a highways perspective, subject to conditions and the legal agreement, everything is fine. The layout of the site, there have been quite a lot of changes. There's a lot of changes, particularly to some of the house types, also to elements of the layout to get the community centre, neighbourhood centre, sorry, in a sort of logical layout and relating well to the neighbouring parcels around it. So we've got, like I say, a series of amended house types. There's been some removal of balconies that were overlooking neighbouring properties, that type of thing that's all been brought forward. So these are affordable properties, so the house types are relatively small. That's something that obviously meets the standards for affordable housing, but we're not looking at a scheme of larger properties. These are all 1, 2 and 3 bedroom properties. You've got new development opposite at Wayne Homes, so that probably establishes the character of the area. So these are not untypical of new build properties. So all those are considered to be acceptable. Here we've got just a plan that shows the layout in perhaps slightly clearer detail. This is giving us details of the materials that are going to be used. So we've got properties that have a reasonable elevation onto Cropper Road. You've got properties that provide frontages to the roads. So you're looking at a property rather than the garage to a property when you come down here. They all achieve the necessary spacing distances and relationships. We've got standoff from the neighbourhood centre, so nobody's properties, particularly close to the neighbourhood centre, and that type of arrangement. This property's been turned round to provide an entrance onto the entrance to the site. So all the design and layout work that we've been done has got to the point where we're satisfied with it. As I said, the residential amenity elements have been looked at. There's been some balconies removed and the like to deal with some privacy concerns that we originally had. All the appropriate separation distances are met both within the site and to the neighbouring sites that are built, and also it gives a reasonable separation for those that aren't, so there won't be, you're not stealing somebody else's space.
Carry on.
There's also a construction management plan proposed as a condition, because obviously construction works can create noise, vibration, dust, the like. So we look to control that, given that there are residential properties around. So we would impose a condition of that nature.
Isn't it?
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the housing mix, local plan policy talks about providing a mix, and it talks about focusing it on smaller properties. These are the smaller properties in terms of bedrooms, so these are meeting that. So it's fully policy compliant in that respect. The scheme's fully affordable housing, so it's obviously meeting the minimum affordable housing requirements that we have in the local plan. And whilst they are smaller properties, they all meet what's called the nationally described space standards, which is a minimum size standard that there are for different property sizes. So they're not shoebox properties; they are above the above the nationally described space standards. That includes the maisonettes, which is a point that I've been asked to refer to. So there are a number of maisonettes here, so one-bedroom properties in these buildings here, those and also these that have been spread throughout the site. That's something that's particularly important because another local plan requirement is delivering properties that are capable of alteration for those with mobility needs. So there's a local plan policy that talks about the technical standards for that, and those properties meet those needs, which is one of the points that's raised in the late observations because it wasn't quite correct in the officer report. Done that slide. In terms of ecology, obviously it's a greenfield site, so there are potential ecology issues. That's all been assessed by the relevant organisations. They've raised no objections to it. There is a need to, there's been what's called a habitat regulations assessment submitted that deals with the potential for the site to be used by wildlife that utilises the estuary. Clearly, with it being a site that's got development on it already in terms of the garden centre, that's less likely, but there's still a need to do that, and that's been undertaken, and all the ecology issues are all satisfied. There will be a need to implement conditions or impose conditions to the permission to secure those, but that's all something that's typical of a scheme of this nature. And the scheme also will demonstrate that it achieves the 10% biodiversity net gain that is a requirement of new development. So in terms of what the scheme provides by way of contributions, so there's a proposal for a legal agreement, Section 106 agreement, that will cover those 5 bullets. So first one is dealing with affordable housing. So this is 100% affordable. So we will secure that through a legal agreement to make sure that we have control over the operation of that, and that the people who occupy the properties are those in housing need and that type of thing. There's also a contribution towards the public transport improvements that I referred to earlier, which is second, and the third bullet point is a travel plan. That's something that the LCC would manage through making efforts to encourage people to use buses and cycling and the like.
Thank you. Yes, I've got in quickly this time. I have a couple of questions, but also a couple of observations. So if that's okay, I'll do the questions first. With regard to the late observations, I'm only asking because I'm not sure if it matters. On the 3rd paragraph, it says the large single unit and all parking and other access should be made available before the occupation of the 29th dwelling, which makes sense, i.e. 50% of the scheme. Do we know, or do we need to know, what those 29 dwellings are? Are they maisonettes, 2-bed homes, 3-bed homes? I couldn't find anywhere that actually stipulated what those first 29 dwellings should be.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor. I said I'd come back to the late observations and I didn't, so I'm glad you've mentioned that. On that point, the officer report refers to a trigger of 20 dwellings, I think from memory, for when the retail stores are provided. That was an error on our part because negotiations with the developer had moved to a different. Thank you. Negotiations with the developer had moved to a different point, whereby the trigger for the delivery of the neighbourhood centre would be set at halfway through the development. So that's the suggestion that we're putting forward in the late observations, that there is a condition or a clause in the legal agreement even to require that no more than half the development, 29 dwellings, is occupied before the neighbourhood centre is provided. It doesn't matter which 29 there would be, coming to your point, but what we wanted to do was strike a balance between getting the site up and running, getting the roads in, the services, all the infrastructure that's needed for development, which would be paid for more likely by a residential development, but make sure that that doesn't all happen before the neighbourhood centre is provided, because that's one of the key elements of delivering the sustainable development of not just this site but also the wider allocation. So having that provided at a reasonable stage of the development was felt to be appropriate, and halfway through is the point we've picked. Obviously it's a single application rather than before when it was two separate ones. We didn't have that measure of control as straightforwardly, two different applicants, two sites, two legal agreements potentially. So having it as this single comprehensive application is highly preferable and allows us that measure of control. So that's why the appeal was effectively beneficial in bringing us to this point.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Can I go on to the actual report, page 12 of the 60 pages? And again, I don't know why, but I always tend to look to the animals part of this. Under the bats paragraph, it appears that 3 common pipistrelle bats were found in building 12, but I'm not quite sure about the final sentence. Given the low number of bats and the species and the survey history that located no bats, I was satisfied that mitigation is activated on the site. So, do we know what's happened to those 3, or are they no longer there?
I think what that's saying is that there have been, as I mentioned just a second ago, there have been earlier applications on this site, and as part of those applications, they were supported by a bat survey that at the time found there were no bats. Obviously, bats are mobile and sometimes use a roost and will move to a different roost. So I think what that paragraph is trying to explain is that because there were only 3 bats, because they were of the most common species, whilst they are important and are protected, it's not a critical issue that would prevent the development going ahead. It would be more a case of something that you would deal with through mitigation by obviously making sure the bats aren't there when you demolish that building, but then also provide opportunities within the scheme for bats to roost. So rather than them relying on an old shed or whatever building 12 is within the site for roosting, you would have specially designed bat nesting facilities, bat roosts, and you can get tiles and bat boxes and things that you would put onto the dwelling, onto the dwellings and onto the neighbourhood centre buildings. So those are all elements that we would pick up through a planning condition that would require those to be done as part of the development. And it's part of the way of uplifting the biodiversity benefit of the site, because at the moment it's I've been past this morning, it's fairly unkempt, whereas having a lot more buildings with bat nesting facilities designed into them should improve the habitat for bats in the area. And it's an area where bats are likely to go, because there's obviously open space, there's water bodies, so there's going to be flies and things that bats need to feed off.
Thank you. And the last thing was an observation of I was quite excited to hear of the archaeological importance that tools had been found at some point, and really pleased that there apparently is going to be an archaeological written scheme of investigation. So we may not miss something that could be found.
Yeah, the Lancashire County Council have an archaeologist who reviews all planning applications that come in as a sort of a risk assessment. They obviously have awareness of parts of the borough that are more likely to have archaeological interest than others. And with the White Hills area being at a higher level topographically than much of the borough, that was an area that was subject to earlier settlements than most places. So that is an area that they do tend to consider there is more of a likelihood of there being medieval finds or whatever that are available. So they will go through this approach to look for those.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Going back in time, the site was old flood zone 1, the lowest risk of flooding. Then at the time of the local plan, as I said in my presentation, it was elevated, or parts of the site were elevated into higher flood risks. So that has created the challenges that have led to some of the developments being more constrained and perhaps delayed. This is one part of the site that is at less of the, sorry, this is one part of the allocation that is at less risk of flooding. It is slightly higher than the surrounding land, and as a consequence of that, when the detailed assessment of flood risk and the sort of technical assessments that take place about the drainage arrangements have been done, this has been found to be a site that actually it's not at that higher risk of flooding. So it is one that's suitable for development without compromising the flood storage capacities and the flood risk areas around it. It still needs to provide appropriate surface water drainage arrangement, which is why you've got the pond in the corner of the site there. But it is an element that the various Environment Agency, Lead Local Flood Authority are satisfied is acceptable. If I can just lead on from that point, something I meant to mention in the presentation, which is also in the late observations, is that the report doesn't cover particularly the loss of the existing buildings on site. It deals with the scheme as though it's redeveloping a vacant site, and it isn't. So we need to consider the loss of the existing buildings as whether that's part of the planning balance. The buildings themselves are fairly dated and mediocre in terms of quality, so it's not particular harm. But there is a sort of an overall planning policy that looks at trying to make efficient use of existing buildings where possible. The response here is that the buildings aren't of any quality that you could effectively use again. So the better solution is to clear the site and redevelop it. But that perhaps wasn't set out in the report, so that's covered in the layout representation.
Thank you for clarification on 2 points there. Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. Just when you go around some new estates in the area, specifically in Blackpool, really, I suppose, a lot of the new houses have got solar panels on the top. But we never seem to have any, and especially with these being affordable, surely that would be like a great assist to people who are either renting or half buying these houses to, you know, reduce energy costs, etc. But we don't seem to put that as a. Do we not have to, or what?
Yeah, we don't need to.
We don't
because
need
it's
to.
part of the building regulations, so
Right.
it will be part of the development.
Right.
We don't need to be explicit about it.
No, just seems a shame that we don't do it. 'Cause it's,
But it will happen without us needing to say it.
pardon?
It will happen without us needing to say it because it's part of the building regulations.
All right. Oh, so they will have solar panels on. Right. Okay. Right. It's just that you don't see them on the plans. And the community area, which when it's called a community area, I expect like a community centre but they're shops, aren't they? There's no community. It's a commercial.
Yeah, well, it's a neighbourhood centre rather than a community centre, but they are shops.
Yeah.
But that's something that a community needs as a point of
Yeah.
focus.
I get. It's
Next
just-
to them is, you see on the plan here, next to them is a play area.
Yeah.
next to that is an area of open space. And that links through to the other developments,
Yeah.
and it's alongside the access routes from the other
Yeah.
developments. And then and the bus will come down Cropper Road, so it will be a location that if I go back to the wider allocations, I can't find my glasses. Particularly in this part of the allocation, will funnel through that site to get to go to places, either on foot or on cycling or on the bus. So it will be, obviously the access point comes through there, so the shops are next to the access. So it's, the idea is to give it some element of community focus, whilst obviously it's part of a wider housing allocation, so it's not specifically designed to be a community.
Yeah,
it's not a village green or anything like
yeah,
that.
Yeah, I get that.
But it is there as more of a neighbourhood scale to benefit the community that's around.
I just see it becoming a gathering area for youths.
Who are part of the community.
Yeah, well, part of the community, but yeah, we all know what comes with that one. I mean, I'd rather see it with some element of shopping availability, and people can walk to a shop rather than have to get on the bus to Tesco's or wherever. You know, these sites are desperately in need of some sort of provision for local businesses to do business. But they're also in need of some focal point where people can go for information, for people can go for, you know, like an information if it's in the shop and things, because if you're new to the area, it's quite difficult to navigate your way around and feel lost, especially if you get moved there on if they're taken by like a housing association and you get moved there, that's where you're offered a property.
Sorry, can I, in regards to that particular question, Chairman, if I may, you'll notice that there was the reference to the travel planning. One of the elements of travel planning is actually doing things like providing a new resident pack. So it tells people what's available in the local area, where they can get the local buses from, things like that, to try to encourage people to stay local to the site. So those issues that you specifically mentioned there would be picked up through that travel planning exercise.
Right, great. And just the last sort of that was it. On that plan, what's that black thing? Right. Oh, I'll just point it to it. Be easier. Yeah. What's that? Sorry.
Well spotted, Jane.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the a bin storage facility associated with these maisonettes.
Right, thank you. Just didn't know what it was. What is it? Thank
Yeah,
you.
so
That's it.
these are maisonettes here as well, so you've got a similar... Broken this now. You've got a similar facility... Yeah, you can see it.
He's lost your pen.
You've similar facility in that location here, although that's circular, that's square and that's rectangular, and then here. So because they're maisonettes, they have a bigger bin stone.
Thanks.
I just wanted to add, before we move to the next question, that one of the concerns has been about development in this area, which is, of course, Blackpool periphery area. It's in the local plan as one of the strategic centres for development. Has been, sustainability. We need more in communities than houses. We need to have some facilities for people. And I think the interesting thing about this particular application is that, potentially, who knows what will come in, but it's quite possible that that larger unit will be a sort of a food retail store. But also the other units, you might end up with hairdressers and things like that. And the reason I mention it is that on the surface of it, that just goes down as a retail use. But we all know that if you provide those retail facilities in a community, it's a gathering point for people. It's a focal point. People are not just driving in and out, going into their houses, coming out. They're actually then having facilities on the spot, which then is environmentally friendly because they're not getting in their cars and travelling all over the other place for perhaps essential day-to-day things that they may be able to actually be provided for within this. So I think there's a social element to this, is that it gives, I think, if you provide facilities like this, it actually gives social cohesion to the community, because it's not just houses. There are places where people are going to come in and interact with one another and buy food, have a chat, see people, neighbours, etc. So I think that is a sort of a strength, really. Okay, thank you. Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was interested in this green space that is shown. Is the sort of the pond for the drainage in that area? I presume it is.
Yeah. Let me tell you. No. Stop it. Yeah, so what you've got in the sort of communal areas, you've got the shops, you've got the play area, you've got this open space area. Then you've got this area which is the pumping station to deal with the foul waste, and then you've got this which is the pond facility.
Right, the pond's there.
So that's primary focus is to deal with surface water drainage on the site, and then off the plan on the next site there will be areas of open space that it will link into to connect to further areas of open space that they're providing around the surface water drainage areas that they're part of those schemes.
Yeah.
But this will also be, it's not just an engineering feature. It will be landscaped and have that sort of soft edge that you find to find to these sort of drainage ponds across developments.
Yeah. Secondly, yes, there will be a play area, but is it aimed for small babies, toddlers, etc.? Where does the age range?
It's a relatively small play area, so it's aimed at the smaller children. What it does do, if I can remember where the master plan slide was, is this site's in this location here, or general location here. That footpath that I was talking about going from the pond, that comes through onto this network here, and you've got this area here which is a larger play area. So that's one that would have facilities available for older children, and you see that you have to cross this road, but you don't have to go onto a main road to get to it. So the idea being that there will be other toddler facilities elsewhere, but this is a larger facility for older children that will be accessible without going onto Cropper Road or School Road for those children who are,
I am
teens.
concerned that basically there is provision for older children, because it's easy to put 2 swings and a roundabout and think that's it, because the older children do need more than, well, very little really, because they outgrow them very quickly. The other thing that concerns me is when this area will begin. Is there a trigger point for when the developer needs to put this place into operation? Because too often I feel it's the last thing that they actually care about. They're more interested in everything else, and this is not very important to them. So if there's a trigger point on the facilities, is 29 going to say, yes, you need to put that green space there?
Yeah, certainly will be a trigger point, and it will certainly be.
Is it in at the moment?
It will be something that we would secure through a planning condition that hasn't been drafted as yet. So I don't think I can sort of give you a commitment to say it will definitely be 29. But what we would typically do is have a sort of a common sense discussion with the developer. They'll need to deal with some practical issues about developing this site, about having site compounds and contractor parking and that kind of thing, that will influence how whether this area is going to be available for providing that play area until relatively late in the development. Clearly, if this area is going to be the site compound, we might not want to be attracting toddlers to go and play right next to it.
In other words, it'll be
whilst
late.
It's working. So it's likely to be towards the end of the development, but it certainly will be something that is secured by a suitable trigger to make sure that it's not missed and it does happen.
Right. Lastly, who's going to manage this area? Who's going to look after it? Because is it going to be the housing association that's looking after? What are their responsibilities? Because too often, green spaces are not well cared for by housing associations. They're littered. They're not exactly in pristine condition. Is it the parish council? Who will be looking after it?
Again, that's a question I can't give you a definitive answer at this stage, but it's highly likely that it would be the housing association who would take on the responsibility for maintaining the site. We will be imposing a planning condition that requires details of who is going to maintain it, and that will be something that no doubt the developer is discussing with the housing association to make sure that if it's not going to be them that take it on, the developer will need to find alternative arrangements. If this was a market residential scheme, it would typically be the case that a residence management company would be set up whereby all the residents would be required to pay a fee into that each year, and that would then cover the costs of doing the grounds maintenance. With these being affordable housing, that's less likely to happen. It's more likely to be the affordable housing provider that deals with that maintenance. We will be having that discussion with the developer to make sure that appropriate steps are in place, not just for the residential element, but there are also the other communal elements such as the landscaping on the front, the landscaping around the shops, the landscaping around their car parking areas that will need to be dealt with, and I suspect the housing association won't be overly concerned about, but we need to make sure sort of ticks the box in terms of making it the attractive space that Councillor Nixon's concerned about.
Thank you. I do feel this is really important because I don't see housing associations being particularly interested in the wider area. Litter is a problem, and they managing tenants, but also providing a clean space is important. I do feel strongly about this because of what I've seen in Wharton. On these new areas, there's not a lot of care by the housing associations for what they get their tenants in fast, but they don't provide the backup to keep it looking good for the wider residential use. Thank you.
I think to be fair to Councillor Pittman, that is a concern sometimes with developments. Yeah, exactly. So that needs to be enshrined in robust planning conditions and following it up in terms of their responsibilities.
It's not just the short term. It's the
No.
long term.
I think you make a good point.
May I just,
Of course, yeah.
just on that very point, I think it's a very important point. I think once these facilities are in place, it's incumbent on the residents to raise issues, concerns they have with the housing association, and on occasion, if that is not met, they can then talk to their local councillors, and it does happen.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair.
I suppose in this instance as well, the developer has an interest in making sure that the site is well maintained, particularly around the outset, because they've got properties that they're going to be constructing, commercial properties that are going to want to let. So it's in the developer's interest as well that, you know, he's going to get less rent if the area's looking scruffy because the landscaping's not maintained than if it is. So hopefully that will be a further incentive alongside the planning conditions that we put in to deal with the concerns that the Vice Chairman and others have raised.
But I think the Vice Chair makes a good point that actually, you know, people power there as well, and the pressure that residents who take pride in their own local community should play a role in trying to ensure that the housing association actually delivers what it should be delivering. And if that isn't the case, then I think there's a role for councillors, etc., to get involved as well. So that's important as well. Councillor Ledger.
Thank you. I saw on page 29 that LCC haven't asked for any contribution for education, which I guess is a good thing. So can we infer from that that we're providing we're doing well around here?
Sorry, I didn't catch.
There's no LCC haven't requested any 106 money for education, which I've not really seen before.
Yeah, this is something that we've. Sorry, I don't know. This is something that we've recently gone back to them about. You recall this 22461. This is the Wayne Homes application for 350 dwellings. At the time that we considered that, there was a request from LCC Education for a contribution, and then when we got their views on this application, the one we're talking about today, there was a different request. So there was a primary request for one and a second request for the other. So we went back to them and said, well, what's the situation? So they've gone back and reviewed the whole allocation collectively and come to the view that actually the education capacity in the local schools, because obviously 22 is now 2 and a bit years ago, the education capacity in the local schools is now such that there's capacity for the children from these developments without the need for contributions to enhance capacity. So that this application has been helpful because it's sort of put the education authority on to review things in a more comprehensive way than they perhaps have done before. They've looked at it recently, and that's their position.
I think the other thing is, because I raised this point when we had a briefing, And I'm sure as well that John mentioned there are sort of cross-boundary sort of factors here as well, that it's something that I've raised in the past, that in a sense we might be looking just at Lancashire schools, but actually if you lived there you'd be looking at the nearest school potentially that was a good school or suitable for your children, etc. Parents make those judgments all the time, but actually that could mean in this particular case that, you know, a number of children would probably not be attending Lancashire schools. They would be attending Blackpool schools because they're right on the boundary. So that might be a factor as well, that in the scheme of things, Lancashire may have taken into account that a number of these children would probably be going to Blackpool schools, and therefore fewer places might be required. That's speculation on my part, but I suspect that might be part of their reasoning.
It's fact is that there has been, there's previously been perhaps a lack of joined up thinking, but that seems to have moved forward. So there is now more of an acceptance within LCC that there is if there are capacities, there are spaces in local schools. The local schools here are in Blackpool, therefore that's where they're looking at it in that sort of respect. There's also a change from 22 in that there's now a road link from Cropper Road roundabout that goes south towards Lytham. So it's making some of the other schools that previously would be less accessible more accessible. So it brings a bigger sort of pool of schools into the mix.
Okay, thank you. All of these houses are affordable housing, and I heard you mention about I think a legal agreement with us about the types of housing. What types of affordable housing are we thinking?
The scheme that's been presented is entirely what's called social rent.
Right.
So these are properties that
They'll all be for a social housing.
Yeah, they're all affordable housing. They're all for rent rather than the shared ownership or discounted market sale type properties that we sometimes see being delivered. This particular, I assume the developers, has an arrangement with a housing association to provide these properties for social rent, which is the most beneficial form of affordable housing in terms of the council's need.
Yeah. And how come they're sort of all in one space? Because I think in our local plan in the MPPF we don't normally want to put everything in one spot.
Yeah, these affordable houses they're not taking the affordable housing out of the other developments. Yeah. It's just that this particular developer has proposed this scheme as an entirely affordable scheme, which, as you say, in many cases that might be something that we had some reservations about, but here I think it's obviously it's part of a larger application. There's perhaps 400 houses, perhaps more across that site. There's 250 that have been built in the orangey brown here. So you do have quite an overall quantum of development to make sure it's not just a single estate of affordable units, so to speak. It's just a parcel of that type of accommodation within a wider allocation that's being brought forward as part of helps meet our affordable need, which is pretty high. So it's an opportunity that we felt we should take.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds quite. I mean, I think it's positive to have affordable housing, particularly social housing. So, I mean, I guess because there's so many different, it's such a big plan, and there's so many different sections to it. I'm sort of trying to remember. There will be sections of affordable housing in each bit, but this is sort of concentrated social housing, whereas in the other bits it's maybe affordable housing in another category of for sale and other schemes. Yeah,
that's exactly right, Councillor Ledger. The other schemes will be providing a more of a mixed with some rented properties, some discounted market sale, some shared ownership. There will most likely be, 8 houses there, 8 houses there, 2 pairs of semis there, that kind of arrangement, which is more typical. But as I say, this is perhaps more of a one-off, I suppose, because of the way that the scheme's been presented, and it's in the middle of the development, and we want to see the allocation brought forward. We want to see the neighbourhood centre brought forward. So that this is part of the overall sort of consideration of the package.
Yeah, no, that's good. Would you say it's normal in sort of planning terms for large estates like that when everything's going to be managed by a housing association, that everything is in one place, or would it still be perfectly normal, feasible for the properties to be spread out across the wider estate?
Yeah, the affordable housing SPD and sort of general design guidance would look for affordable houses to be pepper potted, is the phrase they use. So a cluster here,
Clustered pepper potted. Yeah.
clustered, a cluster here, a cluster there. The housing associations want them in clusters because it helps with their maintenance, and it also, we want them in clusters because it helps integrate them into, it's more of a mixed community rather than just that's the affordable estate over there, that's the nice estate down there. You'd want to see it more mixed like that, but that's not the situation that's been presented here, and we've felt that it's an acceptable compromise to bring forward the wider benefits of getting planning permission granted on the site, getting the site built, getting the neighbourhood centre, getting all the the linkages into it, and all the other elements that I've talked about this morning.
Okay. I mean, I guess just a comment from me would be, it's great to have this amount of social housing in particular. There is something a bit unpleasant, I think, about it all being concentrated in one small area, almost sectioned off from the rest. But I appreciate what you're saying, and that on balance, obviously, it's better to have this than to not have it. And my only last question, I think there's something on page 11 about a cycleway, and I think the report says that it won't be managed by the housing association or the council, but there was a suggestion for a condition or something to have it maintained in future. But I'm not really sure what is meant by that. Does that mean we would want to put a condition in to make sure that someone is maintaining that cycleway?
Yeah, this comes into the point I mentioned in response to an earlier question about having a planning condition that requires details of all the maintenance. So quite often you will have the highway authority adopting the roads. You will have the housing association looking after the sort of gardens and bits of open space around their properties. That in this case, that could leave some areas left over, like the shops. Potentially the cycle links through to neighbouring developments if the highway authority don't adopt them. So we would make sure that there are arrangements in place for somebody to cover the maintenance of them, whether it's the developer, whether it's the housing association, whoever. It's perhaps not been agreed at this stage, but it would be something that, assuming planning permission is granted, that then allows the developer to go off and do negotiations with the various people that he needs to negotiate with to give us the answer to that question that we will need to have had before we get to the point where the dwellings are being occupied and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was a lot of questions, but
No, it's good.
Just a couple of additional points, Councillor Ledger, as well, to bear in mind is that whilst there are allocations on neighbouring sites in terms of affordable housing, I suspect there won't be many one-bedroom, two-bedroom properties, which this particular development focuses on. I think there are 19 3-beds, but the rest are all 1 and 2 beds. And one of the other features is that perhaps this affordable housing site, which is, as you say, purely affordable housing, will also have the benefit, unlike other sites, of having these service centres right next door to their housing. So they do have those facilities in their immediate vicinity, which which is a favourable feature, I would say. Councillor Evans.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Andrew, for picking up the baton today. It's reassuring from my point. Obviously, we look at these individual applications on their own merit, but it is reassuring to know that the master plan for the whole area of development is being looked at collectively, and obviously we as councillors are reliant on you as officers to make sure that the parts make up the sum of the whole in terms of how it all looks when eventually all the parts are put together. So I take on board all the relevant points that are being made today. I think Councillor Ledger's points about putting affordable housing all in one area isn't ideal, but then if you draw back and look at the site as a whole, then there's a good mix of the demographic there. And I also take on board Councillor Nixon's points about the shop units, but again, one of those shop units may well be more based on the community facilities that are required, whether that's a dentist or a vet or whatever else it may well be. They don't all have to be retail units. One of the concerns I've got is the impact of each one of these individual developments onto the sewer network, and I'm assuming that United Utilities are also looking at this as a whole rather than each individual unit coming into this area, because as we've touched on, flooding is a potential issue in the area, and these ponds, as they allow their grey water to be dispersed into the ground, if all those areas of ground get used up, then there is less areas for them to go into. So the couple of the points that I've got realistically are, I think Councillor Farrington may well mention the children's play area in terms of its close proximity to the pond, so I'll leave that for him to pick up. But are United Utilities satisfied that there is sufficient capacity in the drains to look at this area as a whole of all these developments? Are there combined drains on these developments that are going to mix wastewater and rainfall water? Because we've had a report from United Utilities and the Environment Agency about this has an effect on heavy flooding and heavy rainfall, so we would like to see that combined drains are used as little as possible, and also the point that was made about solar panels, are we led to believe that there'll also be electric charging points on some of these properties as well for electric vehicles? Thank you.
Where to start? The local plan, this is a local plan allocation. So part of the local plan allocation process involved looking at the infrastructure that's available to support the development. So United Utilities will have been involved at that stage. They've had the opportunity to either explain that they don't have capacity in there and they never can do, or they will be aware that the dwellings here are coming and be able to sort of plan for their infrastructure works. They've not raised any issue with that at allocation stage or part of their assessment of this application. The surface, the ponds on site, the balancing ponds, they don't deal with grey water, they deal with surface water. So there is no mixing of the surface water and the foul water. There won't be any combined sewers. There will be separate surface water systems and separate foul water systems, so that you're not putting surface water into the foul and dealing with issues in terms of the network capacity. The reason I've put this plan on the screen to answer this question is you'll see these large areas of green between the sites. This is the area of this overall allocation that will be used for flood storage capacity as much as anything. So if you go past that site now, you'll quite often see that it's flooded. So the way that the development will deal with that is that it will elevate the building plots to leave these areas around them that are designed to absorb the surface water or accommodate the surface water. So that will, the ponds will store it on the site and then release it into those surface water, and then it will hold in those areas before it goes off into the ditch network and then heads off back down to the estuary, rather than it being pumped into any United Utilities infrastructure. Did that answer all the questions you raised?
EV charging.
It did.
Or EV charging,
Yeah.
that, again, there are policies in the local plan and in our parking SPD that require, that promote the delivery of those. They're also something that not every house, but many houses now have those facilities, so it's something that I would expect the developer would want to see built into their scheme anyway, or the housing association would want to see built into their scheme anyway. You'll see the properties have all got in-curtilage parking, or the majority of them have got in-curtilage parking, so there is that opportunity for an EV charging point to be built into the house, the car to be parked on the drive and charged up on it. So I'm sure that's something that will be integrated into the development when we get to the nitty-gritty of it being brought forward.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Farrington.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, a couple of my questions were dealt with quite precisely by from Councillor Pittman's questions, because looking at that in isolation, I was wondering about a larger play area where bigger kids could kick balls around and do what bigger kids do, that wasn't near a pond, etc. But so I think that's been dealt with, although I do very much share my colleagues' reservations that a housing association will look after the area well, and I hope that there are strong provisions put in place to make sure that happens. My limited experience of housing associations in Lytham East hasn't been good, because when I've had to deal with one for a local resident, just getting through to them's been a nightmare, holding for 40 minutes on a phone, and then it's taken 8 months to resolve a simple matter. So I'm already fairly cynical about these organisations, and I've only been doing this a short while. Okay, just moving on and picking up on something leading from Councillor Evans' questions. In a way, if a whole system network here, as you've described there, in terms of the pond and where it releases the water and where it goes to, it's all very well, but at the end of the day, it leads into a ditch network that's silted. And I just want to make that point, because, you know, unless we sort out that end of the whole vine's going to wither, you know, there is certainly a major issue potentially in the area if we don't deal with the end bit that gets the water into the sea safely, and I can't see that that's happening at the moment. And I also, just a comment, there was something about peat beds in there, and that's going to release carbon. So in terms of carbon offsetting of plus 10%, I wouldn't mind knowing how that actually happens. But that's my sort of observations.
Thank you, Councillor Farrington. Councillor Settle.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going right back to a comment made by Jane regarding social amenities. This area around Cropper Road, it does include, I think it's a further 350 houses further along. So I'm assuming that's a much bigger sort of allocation of housing. There'll be more social facilities, bigger playgrounds for older children, etc. Because at the end of the day, when all these are finished, this will just be a huge area. You won't know which planning application was which. So I'm actually thinking that when it comes to that, there will be bigger and better facilities, etc. Because at the end of the day, this area is nowhere near a town centre, so it does need quite a lot of facilities. Is that assumption right, Andrew?
Yes. That was part of the reason for the allocation, and it's part of the sort of master planning approach that the very first slide that I displayed with words on it refers to. So you've got this is a master plan, so it's not exactly like this, but the idea being of the four or five different developers is that they will each be making proportionate contributions to the whole of the community. Yeah. So this developer's providing the neighbourhood centre, Wayne Homes are providing the larger play facility here, and there's a smaller facility over here. They're also providing a diversion route for the existing Cropper Road, because that's unsuitable and unimprovable. So there's an alternative route through there and bus connections through it. This developer's providing footways on the frontage. They're each providing flood storage and landscaping and ecology and those sorts of things. So there's been some working together through this neighbourhood, through this master planning approach, to make sure that the development does come forward in a comprehensive way. Unfortunately, there are a number of different applicants involved, so there has been some sort of difficulties getting proportionate agreement on who does what, but we are making reasonable progress on that. We've obviously had Wayne Holmes has been to committee and is delegated to us to resolve a few issues and then issue the permission. Hopefully that recommendation will be accepted on this site. It's not going to be too long before we get this development coming forward. So hopefully things will be coming together and we will be at a point without too much more delay where development's taking place on that site and it's delivering, what we need to maintain our housing figures.
Thank you, Andrew. I do like the idea of all these developers working together. Well,
yeah, it's always better when they do.
I guess forced by yourselves. But I have to say, probably 20 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. There were lots of developments, lots of houses, and that's that. Bye-bye. I mean, you're actually making them now provide all these facilities between them, etc. And it's a good idea. Thanks.
Well, it's not us. It's the local master planning policy that requires that. So it's having that written into the plan that's given us the stick to beat them with to get things brought together.
It's still you and the council.
Yeah, I think you pick up an interesting point though, that where you have a strategic master plan, you can look at in the round a holistic needs of those communities, and you might not get something in that bit, but you might get it somewhere else, and I think that's the point that you were making. So yeah. Do we have anybody willing to move approval? Councillor Settle, do we have a seconder? Oh, we've got all sorts of hands. Councillor Griffiths, you were pretty quick with your hand up. Yes, the recommendations is obviously taking into account the local observations, yes. Yeah.
I'm quite happy to second it. It's good to see affordable homes. And I come from a social housing background when I was younger. And with the retail and the units, I feel you will get community, definitely. Yeah.
So thank you for those comments. Vice Chair, yeah.
Just to be clear, Chairman, I think the recommendation was to delegate, grant permission to be delegated to the head of planning with Chairman and Vice Chair, subject to the stipulations on pages 30 and 31 of the main report, as amended by page 2 of the late article.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Everybody very clear about that. So we've had a nominator and a seconder. All those in favour, please indicate. Thank you.
Looks unanimous,
That's
Chairman.
unanimous. Thank you.
With me, just in
Right,
case.
members, thank you for complying with a few minutes. Okay. We're now going to look at item 2, which is page 32 on your report. And this particular item relates to the conversion of an existing garage and storage space into habitable accommodation associated to Ivy Cottage, Plumpton Lane, Westby with Plumptons. Lovely address, isn't it? Westby with Plumptons. And external alterations of the building to include window and door insertions, gable roof positioned on south-facing roof plane. So, I'm reading all that out because I realise I'm really quite ready to get going on this, so I'm giving him a little bit of time. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Andrew.
Okay, thank you, and sorry for that. So this scheme, as the Chairman says, relates to Ivy Cottage, which is property on Plumpton Lane. So for those who know Plumpton, if you come from Blackpool, Preston Road, past the church, up through the village, and then that goes off to Wheaton that way. So Plumpton Lane just comes off down there. The scheme actually, it's a householder scheme, and it actually relates to this outbuilding at the bottom of the garden to the property. So this is the property here, sizeable semi-detached property. It has a brick and block outbuilding at the bottom of the garden, which is accessed from sort of a service road that serves these properties and those two and this one here. The proposal is to convert that garage into ancillary habitable accommodation for the occupiers of that property, and then make some alterations to the building in terms of elevations wise to accommodate that. So I think it's one thing to make clear is that this isn't an application for that building to be used as a dwelling. It's there for it to be used as ancillary accommodation for the main dwelling. And I wanted to make that point because there was an earlier there was an earlier application, or there have been earlier applications for exactly that proposal, and I think that's something that the parish council were raising concerns about. So there was an application 23 which was ultimately withdrawn, but that proposed this building being used as a residential property. So these are, these are a couple of slides, sort of twisted aerial to show the building. So it's this building here, and looking from the other direction, it's this building here. So you can see this access track comes down onto Church Road, which drops down and then goes under the motorway past the school. This is the building as it is proposed in plan view. So at the minute, just a storeroom. The proposal is to provide living room, bedroom, bathroom, and then retain an element of garden storage in this part. Elevation wise, I don't actually have any pictures of the building, but you can see from the aerial what it was like, and this is how the drawings appear. So in terms of the scheme that's proposed, there's some rendering of the block elevations, flick between the two, putting windows and doors into them. And then the gabled feature comes into this, what's called the front elevation, but that's the elevation that faces back towards the house. So that has a doorway put into it. So it's in the countryside. So we're looking at countryside policies which allow for alterations of buildings where they are not changing their use. There's no extension to the building, and the appearance is largely unchanged. Yes, there are unrendered elevations that are rendered and doors and windows put into it, but it remains as largely as it is now. It's a relatively discreet location. You don't particularly see it from off-site. The neighbouring properties will have some views of it, but sort of somebody passing by the public arena won't see it. It's not going to, because it's not being made any larger, it's not obstructing neighbour views. The windows are not faced towards neighbouring properties. It's single storey anyway, and the access is already there. So it's not. It's already a garage. So its use, any use of the access point will not be more intense than it currently is. We've had concerns from the parish council, hence the committee presentation today. They've objected. They've raised concerns about drainage and about the use of the access. We've also had some concerns from neighbours, which are listed on the screen there, but are also set out on page 35 of the agenda papers. I think their concerns are more about whether I think there may be some sort of dispute about ownership of particular areas of the site. They've also raised concerns about the use being a separate dwelling. But that's not the proposal. It's submitted as an ancillary accommodation, and that's something that we would secure by condition. So the officer recommendation is that this application is approved. Relatively simple list of conditions. Perhaps the key one is condition 4 at the bottom of page 39. Which relates to the use of the building and says that it shall remain ancillary to the use of the main dwelling, and it shall be laid out as shown on the approved plans. So you'll see that the accommodation there, it's a single bedroom, it's a garden store, there's no kitchen in there, so you retain in that link to the host dwelling through the layout, which is then secured through that planning condition. So I don't really have much more to say on it than that, Chairman.
So members, over to you. Any questions, concerns, etc.? Got Councillor Farrington and Councillor Gardner. Thank you.
Quite simply, I have no issue with this, unless it is an Airbnb by stealth. Can we have a condition that this can't be turned into some Airbnb party house? Thank you.
Like minds there, I think. We all thought the same, didn't we, when we read
yeah,
the report?
And ourselves when we dealt with the application, which is the reason for condition 4, which says it's ancillary to the property. So an Airbnb wouldn't be ancillary to the property, and that, if it were to be used in that way, it would be in breach of that condition. So that provides the control that we wanted to see, and clearly you do as well.
I suspect neighbours will be mindful of that.
I
Keep an eye on it.
expect us to have notifications should that occur.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. Does this change the council tax banding of this property, and how do we class this building now? This is purely for my information as much as anything else. Thank you.
And unfortunately, Mr. Curtis isn't any better placed than you.
Yeah, from a starting point, it's not, the council tax banding isn't something that we would get involved in from a planning perspective, which is why I don't know the answer. It's a sizable property already, so it's probably on a reasonable council tax banding. I don't think this grant of planning permission would be something that automatically triggers a reassessment by the valuation office, but I can certainly find out after this meeting and come back to you just as a point of interest. But I just don't know.
Thanks, Andrew. It's just I've had a similar sort of issue in my ward, and I'm just trying to get underneath what the actual situation is. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Thanks, Chair. Just to say, no, I've got no problems with this. I mean, if that were to be an Airbnb with 2 beds, 1 bed in it, and that, I think it'd be a very quiet little Airbnb as it is. The main concern that we would have is at the main house, which probably has got space for 16 people. That could be an Airbnb tomorrow, and we couldn't do anything about it, and that could have 20 people having a party in it every day. So that's the way these regulations work, or don't work, unfortunately. But no, I have no problems with this. Happy to support.
Could we ask for a mover? Councillor Dixon, seconder. Councillor Farrington, thank you. Moved and seconded. All those in favour, please indicate. Unanimous, thank you. Now we move on to item 3, which is page 41. And of course we're, just to remind members that we're familiar with this particular application, spent quite a bit of time on it at the last planning meeting, and we decided to defer to allow time for the applicant and officers to discuss the practicalities and details of the waste collection arrangements, and then for any further consultee comments to be gathered if needed, and the position further considered by officers. So that was deferred, and that's why we're back here today, but we should be fairly familiar with the context of the application. I'm going to hand over now to Andrew to help us with a short presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't actually here the last time this was discussed, so I don't know what awareness you have of the schemes, but I will run through it very, very quickly, just for completeness. So, presumably you understand where the site is, which is to the rear of the post office shop in Clifton Village. The site has planning permission for 5 properties. It was granted a couple of years ago now, and this application is made under Section 73 of the Planning Act, which allows for variations to existing planning permissions to be made. Because it's made under that process, the principle of the development is acceptable, but what we're only looking at today is the changes that are proposed through this Section 73 application compared to the original planning permission that was granted. So that's the site on an aerial view. So this scheme proposes some alterations, it's essentially to the refuse storage facilities, whereas previously there was a communal facility. The idea now is that there's going to be private facilities and bin and cycle storage facilities for each property, with then a collective communal point near to the access point. And what this has also done is it's reduced the size of the vehicle courtyard, because the previous bin access is no longer required. Sorry if that was a bit complicated. So this is the schemes almost alongside each other. So the one on the left is the one that's now proposed. So they're not quite to the same scale. So we've got this
That building there.
yeah.
That building there. So it's shorter.
Yeah, so we've got this area, there's this change here in terms of that building compared to the retention of that building. The properties themselves are generally the same. The parking arrangements also generally the same, but you can see that the courtyard area is revised. We've had concerns from the Parish Council, quite detailed comments from Newton of Clifton Parish Council, who've raised their objections to do with overdevelopment of the site, the layout, the arrangement of the properties, concerns about relationships to neighbours, and concerns about the access point as a point of principle to access the properties. and the vehicle movements that would come out. Those points are matters of principle of the residential development, and because this is a Section 73 application, they've already been addressed by the original planning permission, so the developer has a fallback that kind of deals with all those points. Where things have happened since the last time is there was a concern, last time the application was here, there was a concern about the access arrangements for refuse vehicles. So we've done three things. We've consulted with, well, the developer's gone away and has come up with a proposal. No, they haven't. The developer's gone away and they've met with the council's waste services manager on site. So the waste services manager and one of the supervisors from the waste team have been to the site to look at the existing highway arrangements and to look at where the refuse arrangements for this development will be proposed. They've come back to us and said that they would be able to reverse a vehicle into the site from Preston Road, and so their preference would be for having an arrangement where the scheme that's now proposed was implemented, so there was the vehicles backed into the site and bins were stored within the site and emptied from there. We've also consulted with the Highway Authority. They've come back with comments that say they would request further information about the visibility and the swept path, so the arrangements for a bin wagon to be able to reverse into the actual access. I'm fairly sure they've not been to site, so they've presumably looked at it on Street View and the like to make those views, but their kind of standard approach would be to have a plan to demonstrate that something works for them to say that it works. So they've made comments on that basis, which are reported in the late observations. The waste team have also made comments, and those are in the late observations, which make the point that I've just made there about their preference. We've also gone back to the parish council, and they've effectively repeated the views that committee made last time, is that they wanted the waste issue to be looked at in more detail. So I've gone back to the clerk to explain that has happened and explain to him that it's on the agenda today for consideration. So the rest of the presentation goes through the points generally of principle. So with this being a Section 73, I don't need, the principle of development is acceptable. There's been no changes since the earlier permission was granted, so the principle remains acceptable. The design changes in the scheme that are now proposed are acceptable. The bin store and the change to the storage building are all considered to be fine. There's no change to the parking. This smaller courtyard will probably be better visually, and then the final bullet point there talks about late observations, views from waste services, saying that they're comfortable with the arrangement having inspected on site. So therefore, having gone away from the last committee sort of with that task to go and look at that element, that has been looked at, and officers are satisfied that the views of the waste team are fairly clear, and therefore the recommendation to you is to grant planning permission.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Evans, followed by Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, this application is in my borough. We didn't discuss it really at all at the last meeting. It was just agreed at the outset of the item that it would be deferred for this. So we discussed the original planning application at detail when again some of these concerns were raised, but just to clarify that was the point.
To be fair, Councillor Evans, members did have access to the full report. I think that's what I was trying to indicate.
Agreed. I have difficulty with this. I abstained last time, and I won't be able to support it on this occasion. But I do need some clarification. This isn't a road that comes in and out of here. This is a track which is to service the back of the adjoining properties. And just to put it into context, Preston Old Road, there is no or very limited off-road parking on Preston Old Road for the properties that are on there. So it, as a street, it has parked cars on it pretty much all day long. My principal concern here is obviously for the shopkeeper and the post office, which is the only shop in Clifton Village. If you take what we were discussing on the previous application about a number of properties with no access to any retail at all, well, this is a village. It is on the bus route, but that is the only shop other than going into Kirkham or going down into Newton, and it does have a post office in there again. That is a narrow track. The only parking for anybody going to the shop is directly outside, and the shopkeeper has expressed some concerns there. He's also very concerned about the bin lorry, and I take on board that there's been a site visit, but I would gently suggest that if the bin lorry turns up and there's parked cars on either side there, that it won't reverse into there. It'll stop in the middle of the street. You know, there's a filed waste bin opposite my building on quite a large junction, and dare I say that the bin lorry doesn't pull alongside the curb in order to empty the bin. It parks right across the lane, right across the road, while it gets the back of the lorry to the closest point to the bin possible. And obviously if there are 10 or 12 bins up there, there are already the bins for the existing properties to the left of the shop. You know, I'm concerned that that's going to create a blockage, and I would be interested to see how many times they actually do go up there. I think the highways were saying that they would prefer to see a drive in and drive out as opposed to reversing into that area. But just as you see, if kids are walking down the street there, you know, they're going to come, if a car comes out of that access, and I realise it's not a huge development, but it'll be double the amount of vehicles than are there at present with the new houses, that anybody crossing that pavement there, you have to cross the pavement to get onto the main highway, is the point I'm making in a roundabout way. And I take on board the part that Dixon Farm there, it's property to the right, there is an entrance into that development there, but you can see the difference in terms of the wide aperture to that development. Shows plenty of visual for both pedestrians and for vehicles. So I have got concerns there. If I could ask you, Angie, to go back a little bit as well, because obviously the old Forge building, which is the original building, is just to the right of the entranceway here. Now that building wasn't part of the original application, the first application at all, as far as my memory serves me right. It was left alone. That wall to the right hand side of that old Forge building is the back garden wall of the existing premises on the property on the right hand side there. So I'd like some clarification as to what happens there. I'm assuming when it says part demolition of that building that wall will be remaining in place, because it does afford that property some screening from any development that's going up there. But I am uneasy about this development, and my final point on it, without rambling too much, is I did draw reference to the fact that in the construction plan we'd need to make sure that any construction vehicles were not placed on the road, skips or anything like that can't be placed on the road outside that shop, because obviously the developer of this land was the previous shop owner and has sold the shop, knowing full well the levels of business that are in that business. And I'm very concerned that with the development at the back of that could have a detrimental effect on the livelihood of that shopkeeper in there. And also, from the drawing that you brought up, it looks like, even though they're now all bungalows, they're all still part of a terrace. Is that correct? Because I thought it was described that they were now going to be standalone properties, but those properties look like they're still joined. Thank you.
Yeah, just for clarifying that point, there's no change to the housing arrangements from what was approved previously. So there's a terrace of 4 and then 1 detached property that's proposed. In terms of the access arrangements, they are, as you know, as you correctly say, it's not a road, it's a track. I think it's 2.5 metres wide at its narrowest point. That's something that the refuse team, the waste team have looked at, and they were comfortable that you can get the vehicle up there. You are also correct that there's no parking restrictions. Whenever I've been through there, the arrangement is pretty typical to what you see there. You know, there is regularly cars parked at the side of the road. We go back to 2009, that's the same arrangement. So terrace properties, it's inevitable there will be parked cars on the road, and I think that's perhaps, to be fair to the Highway Authority, they will have looked at these pictures and seen that these vehicles do impede visibility for other road users of people coming out of that access point, and they also will restrict the opportunities for a refuse vehicle or any construction traffic or other large vehicle to be able to back into that area. But the message I had was that the committee were particularly concerned about the waste arrangements, so that's why there was this visit to the site by the waste manager to check that aspect out, and I can only report what they've come back with to committee.
Please. So obviously looking at that picture there, you know, with a vehicle parked outside the shop, which is quite possible, one to the other side, and if there's a hairdresser's now over the road where there used to be, so that's now a hairdresser's there, so you'd like to think that there'd potentially be some clients that are parked there. So is the default situation, if the bin lorry comes along and they can't turn back into that they would then be allowed to park in the middle of the road?
I don't know what a default situation would be, but I can only assume that would have to be the case, wouldn't it? Because no doubt if the residents' bins were being missed, they would raise issue with that, and the council's obviously got performance targets for collecting bins, so I'm assuming that's what they'd do.
So the point that they say we can get the bin lorry down there doesn't mean at all that they will. It just means that, you know, they can. It fits in the space if the road is clear in order for them to be able to reverse back into it. I just don't think it's a reality that will happen personally, although I do note that it says in the plan now that there's, if I remember it, it's a bit confusing, but there's a bin store, but the bins will now be stored outside the individual properties, so they'll be able, the bin men will go and collect the bins from outside the properties, or they'll be left outside the properties, but then will be put in the communal bin area on bin day rather than the street. Is that? I think so.
Just to clarify, the idea is that the bins will be in the individual properties normally, and then rather than being put out to the side of the road as would normally happen at a property, as we would generally all do, they will be moved to. So the idea is that they will move to this position here. If Andrew can point that to me with the mouse. So yeah, so that area there, that is where the bins sit.
I've got these drawings the wrong way around, haven't I? The labels the wrong way around.
I don't know. All I know is
I've got the labels the wrong way around.
I know there's a building at the back of it. There's the road that the lane that continues round behind the shop and behind the properties, where there are 5 or 6 bins that are already kept for the shop at the back of the shop building. There's then the original that was on the first plan. There's a storeroom which is potentially being used as a dwelling at this moment in time that was earmarked for a bike store and bin store. But then
Sorry.
Where does the why does the demolition of the Forge building come into it? What's the purpose of that? Because that wasn't on the first plan.
So that's the plan. These are the right way. No, sorry.
Yeah.
So these are this is the wall. That's the end property. That's the garden wall we're talking about. That's the Forge building. So that's those are the same. With that area being part of the car park, and the Forge is part of the car parking area, carport area there.
Yeah, so the back wall and the side wall remain.
So that remains around that property. Sorry, I was saying that I was pointing at the wrong drawing, sorry. So this was the original plan, was to have the bins in there and then brought to here. The idea now is that the bins will be in this communal store. So that building is reduced in size to that. So they bring the bins down this back track to here, or down here to here, and the vehicle will reverse into here. So the original plan was that the vehicle could go in forwards. Yeah, they are the one with aren't they? So we're confusing ourselves here now. Let's start again. So it obviously doesn't help. So apologies with John not being here. He does know the background to this. But the plan. This building. The reason to change the condition is that they're seeking to retain this building rather than to reduce it down. So this was the approved plan. That's right.
Yeah, the levels are all around.
Yeah. So this bigger turning area, the idea was that a bin lorry would have been able to drive into here, turn round in this larger turning area, and leave in a forward gear. Now, notwithstanding our discussion that we just had previously to the confusing one we just had, I think there'll still be an issue about a vehicle being able to drive in there if there were vehicles parked around anyway in a forward gear, getting the swing round because it is tight, as you say. So I'm not so sure if that actually changes the situation. But the scheme as proposed is this one. So that building stays, which means that this turning area is smaller than this, which means you can't there's not enough room in there to turn the bin lorry. So it has to reverse down to this point here, and I was right. The idea now is that each property will have its own bins, and they will be brought out to this position on collection day. So those bins there are not shown on the original proposal. Notwithstanding there might well be other bins, etc., down there, as you say, from that property. Yeah. So that is the difference. So the idea is that the bin lorry would reverse down to this point using the banksman to guide it back, and then obviously would leave, drive straight out, as opposed to reversing out.
So if you'll indulge me, Chairman, with a comeback again. So why are we? I don't understand why we're getting rid of an area that was already pre-arranged as a suitable bin storage, even if it's. I'm just trying to think about the cumulative impact on the existing property that's there, with another 5 properties bins basically being put outside somebody else's property rather than a designated bin area, so that a previously approved bin and cycle store area was now not going to be provided. It doesn't seem to make sense to me, and on that basis I can't support it. Thank you.
May I just help Councillor Evans there, hopefully. I think this is a case where a word is worth 1,000 pictures. If you look at the top of page 48, the condition highlighted in yellow, which is one of the amendments we're being asked to approve, says a communal bin storage area would be added adjacent to the retained garage to the rear of the post office. This would be entirely screened from public views by existing boundary features. While bins and bin stores can cause visual harm, the well-screened position and separation mean the impact will be negligible. I hope that helps to clarify, and apologies for jumping in ahead of officers there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah. Just in terms of the why we're being asked to consider an alternative arrangement, I suppose as people's plans sort of crystallise out, they do change, and so quite often we are faced with proposals to change applications, it is in fact why Section 73 exists to allow those variations to take place. So it's not uncommon. What we have to do is to consider whether the scheme as put forward is acceptable or not. So it's not the fact that there's been a previous approval doesn't mean you are stuck with complying, delivering a development in line with those previous plans. The system has been designed to allow an element of flexibility. So that's what we're being asked to look at. So the question we need to look at is this revised scheme and arrangement acceptable? So the way in which the officer's report sets it out is that instead of having a communal bin in a store, they're individually provided for in the gardens with a collection point, notwithstanding the debate about the access from the Highway Authority and the bin team. It's concluded that is a suitable arrangement. If the committee consider that arrangement is not suitable, then obviously this application could be refused if that's what the wishes of the committee, in which case the applicant would then have their original planning permission still and would obviously be able to deliver that previous permission. Hopefully that clarifies it.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair. If you read the consultee comments in the late observations, the waste fleet have said a H marking has been discussed in front to provide a clear access, and the collection crew currently reverse into Dixon Farm Mews, which is a street nearby. So I'd like to support this application, please.
Councillor Nixon, sorry.
Right. On the plan that we've just had, the drawings, the proposed, the new site, this building that seems to be part of this problem, what is the building? Why is it necessary to keep it? And what is it? Why? I don't understand why it's. I'm not sure what that building is, and why all of a sudden the change to keep it from the original plan.
My understanding is that it's just a storage building. It's not a building
It's not going to be somewhere else for somebody to live in, is it?
Well, it's not part of this scheme as a separate dwelling or anything like that. It's shown on the plan that's now proposed, which I've swapped the labels around to get it right, as being a cycle and refuse store. So it's not.
That was what was approved, but it's not that now. That's not what's proposed. It was
that
approved.
Is what's proposed. The labels were the wrong way round.
Right, so on the approved, the building has actually disappeared and it's become a cycle and refuse store. But this building, is it going to be another accommodation?
No, it's proposed as a cycle and refuse store.
It's staying as a cycle and refuse store?
That's the proposal for what it will be used for, yeah. If there was to, I don't know if there's a further application.
So why do we need another refuse store? Where to put the bins then?
Yeah, I can't answer the question, I'm afraid, because I don't know what the applicant's intention is for that. All I can explain to you is that this scheme has changed from the earlier scheme to retain that building and indicate its use for storing of cycles. And I don't know whether refuse might be the right word for it, or whether it's more of a communal store. These properties don't have sheds or garden space, or much garden space to put sheds in. It might be somewhere that the 5 properties all together have somewhere to store lawnmowers and things. I generally don't know.
Right. Is that necessary to clarify that exactly what it is?
Well, I think, Chair, if I may, it's clearly marked as a cycle and refuse store on there. I think if your concern is it going to be used as an additional dwelling, then irrespective of what it says on that drawing, it would need planning permission.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Goodman.
Thank you, Chair. Rather an obscure question, I'm sorry. You may not know the answer to this. The former forge, is there any historical evidence there that could be retained? Is there anything in there that would be interesting?
Well, as members know, that we carried out a local listing process, and it didn't flag up as part of that process. That's not to say that it wouldn't have any value, but I suppose the key issue is that the fallback position, which is the previous permission granted, is still to show that building going. So our consent has been granted to deal, to remove that building, or to adapt it to provide that carport.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Farrington.
Thank you. I'm just casting my mind back to the last meeting, and the major reservation of the committee was the fact that people thought a bin wagon couldn't do a 3-point turn in that larger area. I can tell you that they can, because they're very good drivers easily. So if this is rejected today, the default position seems to be going back to something that may be more sensible anyway in terms of it going forward. So either way, the other point I would make is that living on Wharton Street and having service roads down the back, Wharton Street North, Wharton Street South, we have a similar position with bin wagons, and they reverse over the length of a football field in terms of distance at several points and come out during busy times with school children. And it's just a fact of life in these small sort of communities that we have to do that. And with the appropriate marking on the road, will allow them to reverse in. Anyway, in terms of, in comparison, this is a doddle compared to what I see. In fact, Wednesday morning, bin day, what happened at 7:30 this morning with the grey bin. So it's just sort of, I would, I think we're overcomplicating this and getting too bogged down in something that a refuge team would see as meat and drink for their teams, to be honest. I don't think it would be an issue. And the other final point I'd make is that if anyone ignored the markings that were put outside, the yellow markings that Councillor Griffiths highlighted on the late obs, and parked across, and they had to stop along the street, well, that would just be in line with the fact that they go along the street preceding, and then after that point stopping and picking up bins. That's part and parcel of what they do anyway along the street. It's not as if it would be an unusual circumstance. So even the worst case scenario, it stopped for a minute, it's not a disaster, but most of the time it'll probably be able to get in anyway. So I would support this, but if it's rejected and we fall back to the previous scheme, then I'm happy with that as well, to be honest.
Thank you. Councillor Ledger.
Thank you. I don't really have a question. It's more maybe a question to the whole committee, because it follows on directly from what Councillor Farrington just said. I mean, from looking at this, I think the original one seems slightly better actually than the proposed one. From what we've all discussed and what we think is important for the area. So I guess mine's more of an open question to the committee. Which one do we prefer? Because I think the original one is probably superior.
I'm going to come in with a couple of comments, if you don't mind, at this stage, because I've been listening to. I think I'm of the view that we're overthinking this. To be honest, I go all over the country, thinking of all sorts of streets where, when they get refuse removal, you can't get past because there are parked cars, and when the wagon stops and you're behind, you just wait. And in fact, some of the streets can be very long and you can be there for some time, or you're trying to back or whatever. That's a real problem. That's a real problem. I do, however, understand some of the concerns that Councillor Evans has expressed, and I've been out there and I've had a look myself, and it's not ideal. I'm of a mind to support this proposal for the following reasons. Is that I think reversing in rather than manoeuvring on a site, which I think would be detrimental to the neighbourhood amenity of that development, the people living there, having wagons moving around, doing three-point turns, etc. I think a gentle reverse manoeuvre, if that was possible, and then there is a collection point, a communal collection point, they'll be very, very quick back out. They've also got a banksman. They are trained to deal with these situations. They come over. I mean, congestion is a matter of fact in our country now, and on-street parking can cause all sorts of constraints. We've had the very people out to look at this situation who are actually having to do this job and deliver this service safely, and that's what their preference is, that they would back in. Now, in the event of not being able to back in, the worst thing that can happen on this stretch of road is that, okay, it can't back in, so it stays in the middle of the road, they nip down, pull the things back up, and they're away. They're already doing it down the Mews, which I do accept is a slightly more favourable access with display and everything. But my own feeling is that I would be willing to support this particular proposal, because actually I think, although the original one, it could go back to that, I think in terms of the overall application, that makes it worse for the people living on the site in the development, having big lorries coming all the way down in a very restricted space. Yes, they could manage it, but there's quite a bit of manoeuvring there, and then back out. And I would also say, from a time point of view, that's going to take longer going down, manoeuvring around and coming back out again than backing down and straight out. So there are challenges, whatever, but personally I would be willing to support this particular proposal. I'll leave it there for other people to comment. I've come in late because I clearly want to listen to the whole debate and whatever, rather than predetermine any of these things. But my own feeling is that despite the legitimate concerns that have been expressed, and it's not an ideal situation, I presume that is there one visit or 2 visits a week?
It'll be one week and potentially 2 the next week.
I've seen bin men in similar circumstances operate, and they're very efficient. They're in and out. They want to get their shift completed, and I think this is an acceptable proposal. Mr. Evans, yeah, I thought you might want to.
Yeah, I take on board the points that have been raised, both for and against, and obviously I'm taking into account parish council's concerns, people who live in the actual street, and obviously the people who are operating that business, because if we do lose that business, then the area is worse for that. Can I just, further to Councillor Nixon's point, if you could just, Mr Evans, if you could just clarify for me, it is the case that if that storeroom is being used as a residential dwelling, then it would require planning permission, and does require planning permission.
Yeah, certainly the only thing that will make any difference to that will be if it's been used for a period of time with, you know, an established use has been created, but I don't believe it has.
And how long is that period of time?
It's in a slightly bit of a flux at the moment, but it'll be at least 4 years, plus a bit, because the legislation has just recently changed. It's going to move to every use or development needing 10 years in the future. So at the moment there's a transitional arrangement. But
and presumably if that was used as residential, it would also incur council tax like any other residential property.
One presumes so, yeah.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
Are there any other comments, questions? Could we have is there a mover? Councillor Griffiths, you're moving. Councillor Gardner, hand up. So it's moved. Do we need to look back at the recommendations, or?
I think, Chairman, that the recommendation is. Sorry, my battery's just died, which means that which is where Andrew's disappeared after. Yeah, the recommendation is as set out in the order paper.
Okay, everybody clear about that?
Subject to conditions on pages 49 to 55.
Okay, thank you. All those in favour, please indicate. All those against, please indicate. Are there any abstentions? Thank you. It's carried. Thank you. We move now, I think, Mark, you'll come in here, won't you? We move to item 5 regarding planning matters, which is offshore wind farms and transmission assets consultative member group. And Mark Evans will deal with this particular item.
Right, yeah, very simply on this matter.
Do you want the report?
It's okay, yes, but it's okay, I will, just in case I get any questions. Thank you. So yes, the two things. We've received notification that there is a proposal to build yet another offshore wind farm, which is in the dark box at the top of this point on this now. No. Anyway, the black box just off the Isle of Man. Yeah, there. So that's that's in the Isle of Man waters, and it would be connected, however, to UK grid, and so they are likely, or they have been granted a Section 35 determination under the Planning Act of 2008, which means that the connection will be, like the ones to the other wind farms, considered as a nationally significant infrastructure project, which means the application will be dealt with through a development consent order, just like the two cables that we're, or the route of the cable that we're currently considering. The line of that route has not yet been determined, but the red edge on that plan shows the area of search to find a plan. So it would connect to Penwortham substation like the other cable, which is the area with the red dot, just in there. Yes, thank you. So it might well be that the cable could come down through Southport and up that way, etc. But I think it's fair to say that if the other routes have come down through Fylde, there is a good chance that the same parameters will be applied and a further cable might come our way. We do not know at this stage. The aim of this report, however, is that this committee set up a small consultative group to consider the implications of the existing proposals to the Morgan and Morecambe offshore farms. So this is to get authority for that consultative group to also deal with anything that comes out of the Moya Vannin proposal, which is this proposal as it's known of the Isle of Man. And also to add to that group 2 additional members formally, one being the chairman of the planning committee and the other being the council's lead member for environmental matters. I think that when the group was originally set up, it probably is safe to say that there probably wasn't as much community interest in the proposal at that time than has been developed, and so I think that's why we feel that it would be appropriate to add those 2 members to that group. So subject to, like I say, the 3 elements to the recommendation. One is to note the proposal. Second is to extend the remit of the group, and the third is to add the 2 members that was referred to the body. And that's it, Chairman, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Farrington.
In terms of widening the scope and the number of people, I'd have no issue with that. Just wanted to go back to one thing you said, and could you just pin this down? You said it's just come to your attention, or you've just been made aware. How long have we had this in our sights?
The Section 35 decision was made in September or October last year, I think it was. It wasn't directly notified to us, so we've only found out about that more recently, at the beginning of this year.
Okay. And so, but before that, before it was actually granted, because it was obvious it was going to be granted, how long were we aware of it before then?
I'm not too sure. I mean, in terms of a proposal for an offshore wind farm at Moya Vannin, they've that's been around for quite some time now. In terms of the connection and it being a nationally significant infrastructure project, like I say, that's the key issue there. I think when we first were aware of a further wind farm in the Irish Sea, there was no indication of where it would be connected. So that's sort of crystallised out as it's moved forwards.
Okay, I'll leave it there actually. Thank you.
Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. If, just say, the scenario plays out that the connection from this new one marries up with the connection from the existing plans that are in, would that increase the size of the cable corridor?
Presumably so.
Oh, great.
I mean, there might be a number of issues that the existence of the existing two cables in that current application bring, and that is that, for example, if there are some narrow gaps that cable is threading through, there might not be room to fit a third, so it might have to take a route just from practical points of view. But there are standoff distances between the cables, so the reason that they have to be set apart, there are standoff distances. So presumably a third cable will be another standoff distance. This development is a lot newer in the process, so obviously the other issue would be that if they were all granted consents at some stage, you could end up the way that we're obviously making representations on the existing submissions, that there could be a situation whereby you get a cable put in and then you get another cable that, rather than doing them concurrently, that follows on at some date in the future, and then you could have a third cable going in, so you could have a long period of disruption. And that is one of the issues that we have made representation to on the existing two, let alone a third, and is actually an issue that that has been picked up by the planning inspectorate, that they want that looking at at a greater level of detail in line with our request.
Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Chair. Does this therefore mean, if the cable corridor is going to be wider, it also means there's going to be another booster station to around Newton? Because obviously one more means a third more capacity, doesn't it?
Yeah, I understand the actual wattage output of the facility is lower than the other two. It's a smaller wind farm, but again, the terms of the submission are very, very open into, like I say, it's that big area, likewise, but it does include any necessary equipment, so substations that might be required. So one presumes that there will be a requirement for an additional substation, but it may not be as big as the two that are proposed currently. But we simply do not know, because it's the next stage of the process, having been accepted as a nationally significant infrastructure project, is for the developer to engage with the interested bodies and the communities, etc., that might be affected by the proposal. So that, as we've seen with the other applications, when they did their pre-submission consultations, the substations were considerably larger. They're still very big, don't get me wrong, but they have come down in height over the original parameters that they proposed. So again, this might well be, again, this iterative process.
Thank you.
Councillor Legend.
Thank you. No, that's helpful and good to know. I'm happy to support the recommendations. They seem sensible and a good way forward. I wondered whether the consultative group could include, I know it's got Conservative and Independent group members, could it also include someone from Labour and Lib Dems as well, just because we have an interest as well?
Yeah, in terms of requirement, there's no requirement because it's not got a decision-making body; it's a consultative body. However, obviously, the makeup of the group is up to this committee. So, like I say, the way it works is that if I liken the process to be like a roller coaster. Once you got onto the, once it drops you off the top there, you're on the ride till the end, and it's very driven by timetables. So sometimes there is a requirement to get a response back to the planning inspector within a matter of a couple of weeks or so. So what I was keen to establish when the original report came to the committee, as we did with the scheme for the link road up at Skippool, was to have a process by which we could, so the authority to respond to those consultations is delegated to the head of planning, but given the public interest, member interest, etc., that I wanted a consultative group to run that by. So so it's there as a group. In terms of how it's operated, we've had a couple of meetings, Teams meetings, where people have sort of been able to look at what's been proposed to put forward and comment on it. And some additional bits and pieces have been included, some other bits of pieces have not been included because the members involved were satisfied that the issue will be picked up elsewhere. So I think the short answer, I suppose, after the long answer, is that it's up to this committee. If you want extra members on it, that I don't think there'd be any issue with that, and I presume from a legal point of view there wouldn't be any restriction on the numbers at all. So
I was going to make more or less the same points, that it's not a decision-making body, it's simply advisory and being consulted so that we can give proper and appropriate responses to the questions. I don't have a particular challenge with what you're suggesting, but we do feel that obviously expanding the group in this way, that is in the proposal, will give us a little bit more resource in terms of responding to these things. So, we're happy to have any suggestions that you'd like to put forward.
I'm just saying I'm happy to get involved now. So.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gardner.
I agree with Councillor Ledger on that, and particularly from my position as a Liberal Democrat, but also from the fact that this does very much affect my ward. Thank you.
At the end of the day, we can put 2 names forward, and then the planning committee can vote here and now as to whether they think that's appropriate or not. So are we getting? Councillor Ledger, are you putting yourself forward?
Yes,
okay, you've done it now. Is there anybody else put forward, or was Councillor Ledger the only one? Oh, Councillor Gardner as well. Okay, so we have put forward. Sorry, your support. Well, let's go to the vote anyway. But yeah, so we've got Councillor Gardner and Councillor Ledger as 2 additional names for the consultative group. All those in favour, please indicate. Don't have a problem. That's fine. Okay, that's carried. Thank you. Welcome. You might regret it. Finally, could we just formally note, before we end formally the meeting, could we formally note the 2 appeal decisions? Yes, can we all agree that we note those particular appeal decisions? Yes, and when we formally close, we can have, if you want, an informal discussion regarding those. But we'll formally note, and I formally close